All right, today we're going to be adjusting valves on a mid-90s Bayou 300. This is a four-wheel drive model, but the two-wheel drive is the same process. So I've got your valve clearances here, what it's supposed to be. We've got your intake, your exhaust, 0.0039 to 0.0059 inches. We got 0.10 to 0.15 millimeters, and that's for intake. Exhaust is 0.0079 to 0.0098 inches, which is 0.20 to 0.25 millimeters. Now these are, from what I've found, loose measurements compared to some other ones that I've found, and Kawasaki's are notorious for having valve adjustment issues. So if you've got low compression, definitely want to check valve clearances before you go and rebuild a motor. Valve compression test on this is going to be like 115 to 180 in that range. PSI, obviously the 115 is going to be on the fairly loose side. So going to pull 8 millimeter bolts off here for the intake, and then we've got the same on the exhaust side right here. You can, and you may as well, pull the two 8 millimeter bolts off here. This is the cam chain sprocket window here, and that just makes things a little bit easier when you go to find top dead center. And the next thing you want to do, you can do it without pulling the recoil pull starter, and if you're just doing something quick just to check them, that's the way to do it, but it's a little bit harder. It's a whole lot harder to find top dead center. So I suggest pulling the four 8 millimeter bolts off, pulling the recoil starter off, and grabbing a 14 millimeter socket and turning your recoil pull starter that way. Last thing you want to do here is pull this flathead screw cap off here. That's going to look down right on top of the flywheel, and I'll give you a close-up picture here in a little bit. So you're going to want to turn this motor to find top dead center, and you're going to want to turn it counterclockwise, and you spin it. And the easy way to check if your four-wheeler is still running decent, if your valves have some movement there, then you are close to where you need to be at. But you want to check, make sure this is in top dead center here, which is a T and a line. There's lots of lines on this flywheel, and make sure the T is beside it. You want to make sure your lines go straight up and down with your cylinder, and just the same motion that your piston would go, straight up and down. So this looks like it's slightly off, and sometimes they do, because it's either going to be slightly back or slightly forward depending on where your chain ends up. This is slightly back. You can, if you look down, again I'll show you the picture, but you can see a top written right there. You want this to be right in the middle of the top, and it's slightly to the right of there. So next thing you want to do is grab a 10 millimeter wrench and a flat screwdriver and feeler gauges. You want to make sure that you have feeler gauges with you. Feeler gauges look like this, and they are they've got your measurements on there. A lot of times they'll have millimeters, and they will have inches. So whatever you think is easier. Now, from what I learned from Kawasaki, a lot of times you want to go on the looser side on these measurements, because they do tighten up as they wear. So we're going to do on exhaust side, we're going to do 0.23 millimeters, which is kind of in the middle, a little bit on the looser side. What you can do, and you won't be able to see this one very well as much as the intake, but go ahead and stick your feeler gauge in there in between what would be the top of your valve and the screw there. So get it in there, tighten it or loosen it depending on what you need. Obviously we've had to loosen the lock nut, so go ahead and loosen that, and slide your feeler gauge in there. You want a little bit of drag. So if you can hardly move it, then you've got too much drag on there. If you can just, well, a good test is to fit the next size feeler gauge in there. If you can fit that in there, then it's too loose. So then what I like to do is take my feeler gauge, leave it in there in the position that it's supposed to be. I take my flat screwdriver and my wrench and put my wrench on there, flat screwdriver on there and tighten it up. A lot of times, sometimes that adjustment screw will move as you tighten that up, and that's why I leave my feeler gauge in there, just so it can kind of put pressure on that adjuster to keep it in the right position. So when double check it again, then we're going to go to the intake side, and that's going to be the 0.10 to 0.15. Now if we're going to go on the loose side, we can go to like the 0.14. We'll do a 0.13 for the loose side. So the loosest would be 0.15, but a lot of times you can hear some pretty good valve chatter is what they call that if you go to the loosest setting on these valves. So again, loosen the lock nut, take your flat screwdriver and adjust it to where it needs to be. This one you're going to be able to see a little bit better. So tighten it down onto that feeler gauge to where it's snug. Again, if you can kind of picture just a snug feel. Again, if you're really having to work at it, I've seen before where people break feeler gauges because they tighten it down on top of there and try to move it. That's obviously too tight. So this is going to be a good spot here. Leave the feeler gauge in there. Put my screwdriver on there to hold it and tighten it down. Make sure then that you can feel it. That's a little bit loose, so I'm not sure what happened there. I must have barely loosened it up there when I was trying to keep it from. There we go, and it's perfect right there. So that is, those valves are in the right position there. Now what I like to do then is spin your motor over a couple times just to make sure everything's where it needs to be. Then I recheck just to make sure we are checking on the right top dead center compression and not fire. And then I'm going to show you this down here. This is top dead center here. You see the T lines up with that mark in the center of that hole there. And then there is your flywheel, and the angle makes it look worse. There we go. The angle makes it look worse than it was, but there is that line, and then the top is back there. And we're slightly by the P, but if you see we move this one tooth over, we'd be clear over here, way to the left of the T on top. So this is, I know we're in the correct position there. So that is valve adjustment on a Bayou 300 four-wheeler.